Happy Africa Day +1, and welcome to the YALI Summit session on storytelling, podcasting, and blogging to highlight community voices. Call me Ishmael. It was a dark and stormy night. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Or perhaps just once upon a time. These are all famous lines from stories, from books and movies. And my guess is, if you're like every other human being who's ever walked the planet since the dawn of time, hearing those words create a sense of anticipation, that we're going to journey together from one place to another, learn about protagonists and hear a story. And the reason we respond that way is since from cave paintings to Instagram, the most powerful tool that we humans have to share, to teach, to learn, to inspire is storytelling. That's one thing that hasn't changed, even though so much of our lives have changed. And that's what we're going to be talking with you about today during this session. My name is John Molesky. I serve as Director of Digital Programming at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars in Washington, D.C. And during this session, along with the help of three very talented and accomplished presenters, we'll be sharing with you thoughts on the power of storytelling and how to create impact and change. We'll attempt to offer tips and practical advice along the way. We also hope to offer a bit of inspiration. So here's what our format will be. It will consist of three presentations from each of our speakers. Then we'll have a question and answer period with you. And then we'll do a little bit of a wrap up. You will present your questions, and I'm guessing most of you have already been in other sessions during the week, but you present your session or your questions during the chat function, and we'll get to as many of those as possible when that time comes. A quick introduction of our guests. Gina Malope is founder of the Gina Masiko Arts and Heritage Trust. Kwame Darko is founder, CEO, and chief strategist of Kwamedia. Little play on words, Kwame. Elizabeth Muambulukutu is co-founder of Arts and Culture for Development Africa and currently serves as regional communications manager for WaterAid. Now, speaking of storytelling, this doesn't begin to tell their stories. I would direct you to the conference materials where you can see the expanded bios, and you'll know more about who you're hearing from today. And the most important thing to know now, I would say, all three are leaders, all three are entrepreneurs, and all three are master storytellers. So you're going to hear from them in order, and Gina, you have the floor first.
I call on you, sky, you sun and the moon, you earth and the sea. Give me the wisdom I need to tell the story, to tell the story and bring back respect to our culture. Sipaga baga langa nyanga mhlaba nolwandle nginike ukuhlakanipha yebo mina ngixoxele ndaba yelele ngixoxele ndaba kubuye inhlonipho yamasiko ethu ngixoxele ndaba ngixoxele ndaba heyo ngixoxele ndaba heyo ngixoxele ndaba elele ngixoxele ndaba heyo ngixoxele ndaba kubuye inhlonipho yamasiko ethu. Sanibonani. I wish to greet you, and I'm so grateful and humbled to be on this platform to share with you one of my favorite topics, storytelling. For as long as there have been people on earth, there have been stories. For as long as people were able to communicate in language in different ways, we always had stories. And for me, the privilege was also having a grandmother who was a master storyteller. And then later on in my life, I found myself meeting praise poets, traditional praise poets who shared wisdoms through poetry. And that included music, that included different indigenous instruments. And I saw myself amongst them And as I continued with my journey, I found myself creatively writing down poetry, short stories, and later on theater pieces. And music was born out of my choosing to be in full-time storytelling. So, as the director of Masiko Arts and Heritage Trust, based here in Durban, KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa, we do a lot of work where we promote storytelling. We do work where we help with workshops, creative writing workshops, and storytelling workshops with young students from primary school to high school to university. But also, I run workshops, empowerment workshops for teachers and librarians. It's very important for storytelling to be in libraries. Extremely important. Storytelling to be in the classroom, for storytelling to be in the spaces where we live. And so for me, I love storytelling, the stories of long, long ago. I also love history telling in the times we're living in. And many, many people are losing a sense of where they come from, who they are, who are their ancestors, and how they ended up in the places they now call home. And when we find ourselves traveling in different parts of the world, I find that people who didn't have the joy and good fortune of having stories being a part and parcel of their foundation. They arrive in places in Sweden, they find themselves in Vancouver, Canada, or Singapore, or Argentina, and they hear people telling their own stories with pride, and they feel so sad. They feel so left out because they don't remember the stories of your people, of their own people. Who's to blame? The parents, the elders in their community. So I think in the times we are living in 2021, we need to promote storytelling even more, to be doing podcasting and to be doing blogging and load these stories on YouTube platforms so that young people and people of all ages for that matter can enjoy the stories and from there be inspired not only to write their own, but to tell them. Thank you so much. I'll leave it there for now.
Gina, and sorry for fumbling around and finding my unmute button before we resume. Terrific. Thank you. And beginning with a song was brilliant. Yeah, you've put a lot of pressure on the rest of us, Kwame. I don't know about your vocal chops, but you have the floor next.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kwame Darko. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone. I'm based in New York. And Gina, again, that was fantastic. And my vocal chops, while I do have a background in music a bit, do not come anywhere close to that. So I think it would be helpful, for of my background. So originally from the DC area, Ghanaian American, and started my career in media, marketing, and brand partnerships when moving to New York, starting in radio, but then also moving into digital media, also events, social influencers, so on and so forth. And I got to a point where I wanted to find what was the next thing, something innovative and the best way to tell stories. And one of my previous managers from CBS Radio had gotten into podcasting. Now, at the time when I heard podcasting, I said, you know what, is this innovative? Is it new? And no, it's not. It's audio. It's a means that we've all had, right? Talking into a microphone, telling our stories. But the difference in the way in which the medium is developed is that people are able to have this intimate relationship with the audience that you just typically don't have, which has been very interesting. And again, from me figuring out whether or not this was the best next step, I thought it was great just in terms of ability to get involved and then people just learning from one another. I'd also like to add that the barrier to entry in podcasting as well. So if you have a story to be told, like other things, it might take more money, or you might have to have other resources in order to tell that story. Here with podcasting, whether it's narrative, something more highly produced, or a fiction or something scripted, if you're able to find your niche and tell that story, there's a ton of opportunity there, and you're able to upload, whether it's to, again, iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, so on and so forth. There isn't a barrier to entry as there are with other types of broadcast media. And again, just to go back to the types of podcast, narrative and highly produced, where you're speaking to a story and you're able to tell that story through sound design, but then also inflection and voice and whatever topics you might be speaking to interviews, which, you know, you might have a panel of a few people, kind of similar to what we're doing now, where you're able to have conversations and expand upon them. And then scripted and fiction, that's something that's becoming very big as well, where you're able to tell these stories, where IP is now getting bought from, you know, different movie hubs and television shows as well. So you can tell these kind of bigger stories as you would. And what I'd also like to say is that if you're building a community and there's a specific topic that you want to speak to, you're really able to drive a lot of fan engagement, and you're really taking a piece of the people's time with this intimate setting. And in terms of building beyond the storytelling, it's an amazing opportunity to monetize because of the engagement that you're getting with this community that you do have, right? So anything from, you know, mid-roll, pre-roll, post-roll, you know, if you're looking to raise funds or you're looking to create a business, podcasts are an amazing opportunity there as well, based on the listenership that you have. And again, you can chop up the different content. You can start it from a video and then create it into audio, or you can just take different clips of the audio that you have to create into mini sound bites, which you can then utilize across social and other places. So there's tons of way that you can leverage podcasts, and again, a super intimate medium that, you know, you should definitely take advantage of to tell your story to either your small community or to expand it past to additional people as well. And that's my story there.
Yes.
Kwame, terrific. Elizabeth, you now have the floor. All yours.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. As introduced, my name is Elizabeth, and it's an honor for me to join the celebration of YALI at 10. I'll speak from a perspective of a youth, an African youth. So I believe that a misrepresentation of any story can block opportunities of development for an entire generation. I believe that the representation of a society's storylines has the power to serve as economic prosperity and self-reliance. For me, using participatory storytelling approaches, I believe this is something that can transform communities in the context that it involves ordinary citizens' voices. Growing up for me, John earlier, he started off with Once Upon a Time. For me, this context was Hapo Zamani za Kale, which in Kiswahili is the equivalence of once long ago. I used to grow up to deliciously narrated stories from my grandmother around a central community fire engaging children, villages, and pretty much everybody from my grandmother's village. For me, that started serving as a central point of my early childhood development, identifying my inner voice, but also igniting creativity and innovation. I'm sharing this example because I believe that through stories, we're able to transfer intergenerational African knowledge, lessons, values, and culture. But we're also able to empower both the subject and the audience. And through doing so, we can inspire action. Hapo Zamani za Kale is a community engagement or project that I am currently engaged in with my community in Tanzania. And this project is something that we envision where everybody in the community can play a central part of telling the African story from the grassroots. We collaborate with community elders, indigenous communities, visual artists, and young people to spark locally driven cultural preservation solutions by incorporating both ordinary and modern storytelling methods. And to date, we've reached over 100 storytellers in 5 regions in Tanzania, documented over 100 narrated stories, and engaged 18 tribes In Tanzania, we have over 100 tribes, but we've engaged 18 so far. And among those includes 3 indigenous communities. I believe that young people can also use storytelling and media to engage in conversations with their leaders, be it in sharing their concerns or contributing towards the broader national development narrative. When it comes to doing so around this, I think it differs from one country to another, and the context is always revolving. But I have definitely seen young people using arts, music, and even poetry. And we saw a perfect example of that from Gina, who just, in her earlier remarks. Nelson Mandela once said, "Artists reach far beyond the reach of politicians." Art, especially entertainment and music, is understood by everybody, and it lifts the spirits and the morale of those who hear it. End of quote. Through this inspiration, this is what drives my storytelling approach. Once it has already been said, I think it has been said enough that data is the new oil. But for me, I believe the combination of storytelling and new media technologies is definitely the new oil. Young people have the opportunity to leverage digital media to tell their stories, but also use this as a GPS to lead their nation, continent, and the world from one destination to another. For young and emerging leaders to do this effectively, I believe that we need to develop an understanding of our culture, our heritage, and our history, because this will essentially form a part of our identity. And thanks to digital technology, our stories do not have to be static because we can visualize the future. I think I'll end there, and we'll be opening up. I'll look forward to the greater depth of the conversation.
Thanks, Elizabeth. And your notion that data is the new oil, I would add to that. Data is just raw material, right? It doesn't have any meaning or context necessarily by itself. I would say that stories and storytelling are what take that data and turn it into something more useful, information, even wisdom and inspiration. Thank you, all of you, for your opening remarks. What I would like to do before we start taking questions from our participants, and we already have one in the queue, is use, we're a little ahead of schedule, so I'm going to use some moderator prerogative and ask each of you a question with a brief answer from each of you. And the question is this. I teach a course on politics and media for Penn State. And I used to, when I met my new students, ask them, are you a Republican, a Democrat, a conservative, a liberal? And it wasn't that revealing, to be honest. And then I had an inspiration and I thought, no, the question I'm going to ask them is there a story in their life that has animated their sense of reality, that has given them purpose and guidance, and that they go back to as a home base? And is it a book? Is it a children's book? Is it a movie? Is it a poem? It might even be a quote like the Mandela quote, because quotes sometimes can contain whole stories within a few words. So that's what I want to hear from each of you. Is there a story in your life that came from any source that is an ongoing source of guidance or inspiration? And let's have you answer in the order of introduction. So Gina, that would be you first.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's lovely to hear what my fellow panelists are doing in the different countries. I'm so excited. When we talk about stories or songs or poems that speak to us, it's extremely important to see how they guide us with us for a long time as we grow up and we interact with people of other cultures. And sometimes you are trying to explain something to somebody and you run out of words. You just don't know how to put it. And sometimes you're coming from a certain language, you're trying to bring it into English, and it's just not sayable in English. In times we're living in right now, there's a lot of need for us to resuscitate hope, because of the pain that people are going through, the loss of loved ones, because of lack of closure, of no proper goodbyes, and not even enough time for mourning. It's very, very painful. And when you try to see how far we are going, you just think, how long is this guy going to stay with us, this old guy called Corona? We don't know why he's here. He doesn't have his exit visa or something, but here we are. He's here. There are two things that come to mind when you ask this question. There's an expression in my home language, it's Zulu, and it says, nalapo lingekho khona iqhude kuyasa. When the cock doesn't crow, dawn will break. Nalapho lingekho khona iqhude kuyasa. Even when the cock doesn't crow, dawn will break. Even in times like these, when there's so much uncertainty, we who believe in hope, and we are the ones who have to wake up that hope again and again as people in the creative arts. We keep saying, even when the cock doesn't crow, dawn will break. These hard times will pass. And then there are stories as well that make you feel that they are speaking to you over and over again. For me, it is the story of the twins who wanted to visit their uncle once a year after the end of harvest celebration. And before they left home, their mother made provisions, and their father made sure they stand at the gate and listen to him. When you get to the place when the road splits into two, you take the route to the left, not to the right. And they did this every single time. When they stood at the crossroads, they said, okay, we take the route to the left. And they held hands and they walked to the left and they visited their uncle, had the most wonderful time indeed. And in our culture, when you are going to a family where you're going to get really spoiled and anything you want, or you can dream of the food you want and all the loving and affection, they say, oh, you think you're visiting your uncle? Because uncles have got a tendency to do that, to show so much love to the children of their sisters. And so the children always have this experience. And one time they decided, you know what? These grown-ups, they keep telling us the same thing every time. I mean, really, when last did they travel? Huh? We want adventure. We want excitement. We want new things. And they decided one time they're going to travel to the right. And they took the route to the right. It was long. And there was thatched grass on either side, growing, and there was nothing, not even a bird that sang an unusual song. And they thought, oh no, this is too long. They walked and walked, and the sun was hot until they saw a big tree with a big branches and then leaves, and they sat under the tree, opened their provisions, and they ate a little bit until they heard the big footsteps of a man-eating ogre. The man-eating ogre came and he chopped the tree, because they were up in the tree now, the children. And as he chopped, the pieces were flying in different directions, and they knew they were going to die today. They should have listened to their parents. But a small bird came, and the birds started singing. What have these children done? I'm talking to you, tree. Stand up. Be stronger than before. As soon as the bird said that, and then he said, Yima, uti gomololo. When it said gomololo, every one of those thousands of pieces that had been cut away fell back into place, and the tree was stronger than before. And the ogre took his axe and he chopped again. And again, the pieces were flying in different directions. Children were crying up in the branches. And the bird said, I'm talking to you, tree. Stand up. Be stronger than before. Yima, uti gomololo. Be stronger. And every piece flew into place until the ogre was so exhausted, he fell down and collapsed. And the bird said, come down, let's go. And he led them to their uncle's home. And when they got there, they were in tears because they were so scared, tears of relief. But that story, why does it stay with me so much? Because sometimes help comes from little voices, places where you least expect it. And so people who come from different directions and assist us when we don't know what we're going to do, when we feel like this is the end, we are told, stand up, be stronger than before. Yima uti gomololo. The same applies to our cultures when we feel like our cultures are not recognizable in the modern times we're living in, whether it's in the social media, whether it's in the blogging that we see in different places or Twitter, wherever we find that we can't recognize ourselves. But we can use our stories to make us feel strong again. And we hear those little voices like that bird saying, stand up. Yima uti gomololo. That's a story that comes to mind.
Thank you very much. You know, one of my jobs as moderator is to watch the clock, and we've been told to keep our exposures brief. But in addition to being a moderator, I'm no fool, and I was not going to interrupt a master storyteller who was weaving a terrific tale. And this is something to know. It's not just what we tell you today or what we suggest or what we recommend. It's seeing someone in action. I think Gina just gave a master class on how to tell a story. There was vocal variety. There was emphasis. There was a sense of drama. She used her whole body to tell the story, not just her voice. So it's captivating. And this is just a bit of a visual master class on how storytelling is done. So I have a number of questions in the queue, but I want to go to Kwame and Elizabeth and ask you about, is there a story that resonates with you the way that the story that we just heard from Gina does for her? Kwame?
So interestingly enough, there's a movie called The Last Samurai, and I never thought that that's where I would, gain a ton of inspiration from in terms of what was said in one of the quotes. I believe he said, "Do you think, can a man change his destiny?" And then the response was, "I think a man does what he can until his destiny is revealed."
Mm-hmm.
And, what that told me is that, regardless of what will happen in the end, we need to continue to thrive and push forward to like whatever our dreams and our passions are. So, while we don't know what's going to happen in the future, and we always want to know, it's very important to just continue pushing. And then when it's all said and done, that's when our destiny will be revealed, and we do everything that we can until then to make our passions and dreams come through, and things that we would like to achieve. And, with the brand that I created, the mantra is times change, stay inspired. And from that, I created, it was like, I want to do everything with passion and everything with purpose, all based on creating a legacy. And in that way, it makes everything feel like it's worthwhile, and everything that I do has meaning and purpose to it. So optimism, for sure. Again, knowing that our health is most important. I lost my mother about 2 years ago to breast cancer. And in that moment, thank you. And in that moment, I think I really transformed, knowing that, she had done all the certain things in her life to provide me with an opportunity to do all the things that I wanted to do. Right. And so long as I have my health, I feel like anything is possible. And I feel like that's the way people should always attack life, and count their blessings, and realize that, anything is possible. And with your health there, you can really achieve anything.
Thanks, Kwame. Sorry for the loss of I lost my mother about 4 years ago. And like you, many of the stories she told still resonate in my head daily. That voice doesn't go away, even though the person leaves this mortal plane.
Yeah.
Elizabeth.
Thank you. For me, I think what I really draw inspiration from is using the languages. And in this context, language comes in different formats. It can be visually, it can be in the context of speaking in people's indigenous languages. And that has always been something that has resonated with me. So through the same context, I would like to use an example of using stories of women to communicate a similar issue. So in this context, hedhi in Swahili means menstruation. So I have used visual art to sort of use that as a universal language. And through that, I have been able to collaborate with not just not just women, but men as well in the community through a Hedhi Huru photo series, which talked about issues women face, particularly breaking taboos associated with menstruation. So for me, the use of languages, the use of visual art is something that always speaks to me and has spoken to me. And I think that has been something that has been instilled to me from an early childhood, because that was the sparking of that inner voice.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay, so now we're going to turn to questions from our participants, and I'm going to ask all three of you to be as concise as possible so we can get to as many as possible. And when it makes sense to me, I'll direct to one of you. Otherwise, I may just throw it open to the group and see who has the answer. The first question, Kwame, has your name written all over it. It says, could you share tips, advice, and recommendations for starting and creating a podcast?
In terms of starting a podcast, I think what's most important is having a story to tell. You know, there's tons of opportunity. And again, the space is very saturated, but I do believe everyone's story can and should be told. But what could set you apart is knowing the story you want to tell, making sure that you don't want to go too broadly as well and speak to a specific audience, because that will set you up for the most success in terms of really honing in and becoming an expert in that area. But really the story that you want to tell, I would say that, again, as I mentioned, the barrier to entry is not that high. You need, a microphone, some basic recording equipment. So like even through your laptop with a garage band, or, even your voice notes, or, streaming live from a platform could help. And again, you'll learn more about the editing, and, the best thing is to just record as much content as possible, and then you can kind of edit it from there and learn, knowing that, again, the podcast will build and you'll learn more and it'll become bigger and bigger. No one became, the biggest celebrity and hit maker overnight, but as long as you start and build that audience and build that story, it'll be great, and it'll be something that you won't regret. But the tip I would say is find the story that you'd like, get that microphone, and again, even the most basic recording equipment, and just record, like as people say with like writing initially, just like write. Don't like worry about all the proofreading and the editing, from the beginning. But so just start recording, see where it takes you, and then put out that first episode, get feedback, and then you can kind of modify from there.
Thanks. Question number 2. This is from someone who's aspiring to work in the film industry, perhaps. Africa's creative sector, specifically TV and film, has expanded over recent years. Nollywood is a prime example of the power of African storytelling, both economically and culturally. How can Africa's creative sector provide opportunities for African youth?
Mm-hmm.
Who has thoughts on that?
Can I do that?
Please.
I think in the creative space, people have got different areas of specialization, but I think it's extremely important to like the story you choose, details the story too, and choose your language, because language is very, very important. It is the conveyor belt that takes the story from you to your audience. And then another important thing is that sometimes we worry about having the most technological gadgets. Sometimes the simplest, like Kwame is saying, is enough as a start, and then you take it from there. I find that many people prefer to see their names in lights very quickly without wanting to work with other people. What Elizabeth is doing in Tanzania has a lot to do with people working together. And when we are pulling together, we are going somewhere. The youth are going to find their way, but don't feel that as a youth you are pressured to quickly make this big blockbuster, or to make the best-selling CD or track. Work with others. When your time comes, it will happen. I know that for a fact.
Anyone want to add anything to those points? Okay. If not, we'll go to our next question.
Sure.
Oh, sure. Elizabeth, please.
Oh, right. Okay. Yes, I think, I see this as an opportunity for youth. For example, in the context of what we're trying to do with Hapo Zamani za Kale, the digital evolution era, it provides an opportunity to relive those old, narrated stories by our grandmothers, not only from the village, which was a more, smaller and intimate setting, but to the global village. So I think the creative sector provides several opportunities. When you think of storytelling, it's not just writing, but we can communicate through visual art. We can communicate through illustrations, through music, and we can collaborate, like what Gina has said. The role of collaboration among youth is what really will drive the 360-degree narration of the African stories. Yesterday was Africa Day, and the theme for that was arts, culture, and heritage as levers for building the Africa we want. I think it's high time for African youth to really look and start, looking at the narrative gaps. When we look at arts and culture, it is one of the leading contributors to economies outside of Africa, though. But when we look inward, African countries have over 100 tribes, for just the case of Tanzania alone. So I think when we develop also the understanding of cultures, we're really able to tap the opportunities in the creative sector beyond, for example, filming, but to other areas, including embracing our languages through literature as well.
Thanks. So our next question, this is a good one, I think, for everyone to contribute to. It's for those unfamiliar with storytelling. What resources do you recommend for people to learn more about storytelling?
I can take that from you. I would say that finding the medium that best works for you, I think is key, whether, again, that's through music, if that's visually, if that's through your voice and podcast and storytelling there. I think it's first and foremost self-awareness and knowing your strengths and where you're most comfortable and where you're most passionate about is the first step. And then from there, I think it's listening or watching the people that you look up to as a starting point. And then, as I said, just getting started is really the key. But knowing more about, your own strengths and what mediums you want to tell your story in are very important. Not just what's cool or what you think that you should be doing, but what you're really passionate about.
Follow your passion.
I would say, yeah, they have passion, very much so, very much so. I would say stories are all around us, and there's a beautiful thing called the art of listening. If you listen with wanting to hear stories, they are there waiting for you. From the person who drives the bus that you take on a daily basis. There's a way that they carry themselves. There's a way that they greet you. There is a way that other people relate to that bus driver. There's a story right there. And so stories are all around us. We just have to heighten and love this beautiful art called listening.
Elizabeth.
Yes, I would compliment Gina and Kwame. I think in addition to sources of storytelling, through the YALI network, there are also resources, and those are some of the areas that I have leveraged resources from. But I think just to compliment Gina on our natural environments, our everyday lives. For example, when you look at Tanzania, East Africa, actually, we have this cloth called kanga, which is a cloth that usually conveys a message, and stories are in the things we wear. They are in the things that surround us, be it, for example, in public transport, there's usually a message, and so forth. So I think it's just about observing our surroundings and connecting with people on an individual level. And I think that's where, that's how we can familiarize with ourselves with different contexts of storytelling.
The person asking the question said that they're unfamiliar with storytelling. I would challenge that, and I think it was challenged subtly in the answers you just heard from our three guests, in that stories are all around you. Your whole life is a story. It's there if you're paying attention. As Gina said, it's about listening. And I'm not suggesting you're not paying attention, but you may not just be thinking of it as a story. When I opened the session and used some of those quotes from famous stories and novels, one that I'd looked at, and I can't remember what book it's from now, but the opening line in the book was something to the extent, and I'll paraphrase, that there are no beginnings and endings to stories. There are just points from which we choose to look back and forward. And I would say, if you kind of think about your own life, it's all right there for you. But I'll give you two concrete reading recommendations in response to this question. One is a book called The Power of Myth, which is actually a series of interviews with the famous American journalist Bill Moyers, speaking to the now dearly departed but iconic master of global mythology, Joseph Campbell. Terrific stuff that connects the dots across generations, across cultures, and really has a lot to say about storytelling at its most basic form. And then another book, a more kind of practical modern guide for how to craft an idea into something that's memorable and effective. It's a book called Made to Stick by Dan and Chip Heath. And they explore the idea of what creates a so-called sticky idea. They coined that phrase, and they come to a number of conclusions. But their bottom line conclusions is that storytelling is the most powerful way to make ideas stick, and that all the other elements of a sticky idea occur naturally when you tell a story. So let's see, question number 4. How can storytelling build bridges between communities and their leaders in government?
Now you're making me feel jealous that I'm not a politician. Politicians can tell stories, ne? Yeah. What can I say?
And some of them are true.
Some of them are true.
That's right.
Few, but some of them are true. I think storytellers coming from different backgrounds, whether they're filmmakers or they're composers, whether they're dancers, or it doesn't matter what language you choose to tell stories, we are able to build bridges with politicians because we reach communities that they seem to forget. And when we are reaching those communities, we're doing some of the work they should be doing. One of the things we've been doing here, our literacy campaign started in 2001. We would make it to, but the need continues to be there. Just a few weeks ago, we're celebrating the 20-year anniversary of Nozincwadi, Mother of Books literacy campaign. And when we are doing that type of work, we are reaching so many communities, donating books, encouraging young people to read, because it's extremely important for them to read. Freedom means nothing when people can't read, and we give them all these gadgets, and we say you can do this, and you can create your own job, entrepreneur, these lovely terms, fourth industrial revolution. What does it mean if you can't read? What does it mean if you can't tell your own story? When people ask you, so you want sponsorship for this and this and this, what's your story? If you don't have your story, no one is going to sponsor your idea.
Other thoughts?
Stories will help people, again, get to the ears and the hearts and minds of people that they're looking to reach. A good example would be, the year of the return in Ghana, right? It started with trying to reach the diaspora in one sector, but once the story got out about what was going on, everyone wanted to get involved. And that obviously included the government, so on and so forth. And there's been an entire movement surrounding it. So again, these stories being told and depending on the way in which it's being told are very influential, and the government and leaders have to listen when enough people kind of get together and group up to. So, yeah.
Elizabeth, should I move on to the next, or would you like to add something?
Yeah, I think for me, I sort of touched on this when I was having my remarks earlier. I do believe that youth can engage with their leaders, and it does not necessarily only have to be, through dialogue is anything that requires a conversation. So this can be through the use of music, it can be through the use of art, and can be through the use of poetry. And I think we've seen a lot of examples of how those can bring communities together. I think in the context of the pandemic, I'd like to cite an example, though it is not in relation to government, but it's just a demonstration of how music can bring the world together. I think everyone pretty much might have come across the song Jerusalema, which was a trending global dance challenge, which first started from Angola, South Africa, and it took the world by storm. And through this example of this song, it was just a sort of symbol of how music can bring the world together in this toughest of times during the pandemic. We saw young people from around the world, from Angola to Palestine, engaging in this dance challenge, and it sort of became a symbol for diversity, inclusion, hope, survival, and unity amidst the pandemic. So that is just one demonstration of the power of music to unite and create dialogue through difficult times.
Thanks. In thinking about the question and hearing your answers, there's a thought in communication theory that when you present an argument, a for or against, in a political context, in any kind of context, what you're asking for is a counter argument, right? You're asking people to either agree or disagree with you. So for part of your audience, that's a bonding experience, but for the other, you've built a barrier. the magic elixir is storytelling, because when we tell a story, we're not asking for or against. We're asking people to come along for a ride with us and experience what the protagonist experience and make their own connections and see how they can relate to it. So really, it's almost the magic trick of how you get past partisan politics and harsh feelings and get people to all on the same page, consider something in their own way. Let's go to our next question, which is, what would you say to young people, and you're talking to some of them now, who think they don't have the skills or talents to use arts and storytelling to create change? What if they're doubting their ability to do so? What would you say to them?
Go first.
Thanks.
For me, I think...
Go ahead.
You go first.
Okay.
Yes,
Well,
Kwame?
I would say that first and foremost, everyone has a talent, right? Everyone has a unique talent, and the way in which they're able to articulate that is just dependent on, what they would like to say. I think everyone can actually exude that, and people forget that their networks are far bigger than they think. You're one step away, one connection away from reaching the next person, right? If you were to contact me, right, directly through meeting me through this, you don't know some of the people that I could potentially connect you with, and vice versa throughout the people here. So I think it's adding value and finding what your talents are, and then you can make the connections from there. There's no reason as to why, you shouldn't believe that you're skilled or have talent. It's just finding, your strength and then maximizing that and not being scared to reach out to people to figure out the best ways you can utilize your strength.
Thank you. I agree, absolutely. Children are born without fear. We teach them to be scared. Children are certainly born, doesn't matter what culture, what color, what background, what religion you come from. Children are born without fear. We teach them to be scared. And in terms of children having talents and abilities and skills and areas that make them who they are, how uniquely they are, we criticize them, we push them down, we make them feel so small until they don't know that they can say anything. They almost don't want to speak. They look down when other people look at them. So the children who are in that space, they are the ones who are asking, calling out, please, please, I want to be heard. I've got something to say. Help me, open the door for me. Or if you can't open the door, just a window, I'll be grateful. So it is important then that when we come across those young people who've been pushed down, who've been made to feel small and insignificant, we try our best to make them feel like you matter, you have got something to say, and your story has a right to be told.
Thanks. Elizabeth.
Yeah, I think everyone has a story. The whole process of creation is a story. And I think my advice to young people around this is don't always seek perfection. I think just like how in a story the plot is forever evolving, so too our skills and our talents, be it in writing, in visual art and music. And I think one piece of advice I've gotten from my mentor is we must always take the lesson from something and raise the bar. So the story that you write today, or the song, or whatever it is that you're using as your tool or your medium of storytelling, if we continue to build on our skills over time, I believe we will be able to narrate and get better at doing that. And I think we have all seen the power of storytelling in terms of influencing opinions, decisions, but even shaping perspectives. So there's a famous quote that I love by Maya Angelou that says, "I come as one, but I stand as 10,000 stories." So of representation, be it in a meeting as a young person, be it in presenting a perspective on a certain thing, can be a representation for, a generation of youth. It can be a representation for women just through that one story. So just embrace those spaces and don't be fearful, because it is through our courage, it is through our mistakes that we can gain courage.
The question suggests a certain universal notion of self-doubt, right? We all have it from time to time. and we all question our abilities. There's a notion that voice inside our heads that we carry around with us all day is the most critical voice usually in our lives, that is always challenging us or questioning us or criticizing us. And we often make the mistake of thinking of that as the real us, our intimate self, when all it is a thought. It's just a thought. And that thought, if it's not useful, can be dismissed, and we can use our courage, as Elizabeth said, or whatever it takes to power through. I just wanted to tell you, if you're questioning your abilities to tell a story, the book I mentioned, Made to Stick, the Heath brothers did an experiment when they were writing the book, and they had their students in university classrooms tell 1-minute stories with no rules other than tell us a story for 1 minute. Afterwards, they surveyed the audience on recall. And the fascinating thing they found is that the only X factor that mattered, actually, they weren't 1-minute stories, they were 1-minute speeches. You could do whatever you want with it. The only X factor that mattered is people remembered when the student told a story. Even if the student was shy, stared at his or her feet, was not very descriptive or animated, if they told a story, people remembered it. Meanwhile, there were glib speakers who entertained the class, but they couldn't remember what they talked about. So everyone can tell a story if you have a story to tell. We have now time for one more question. This is our final question of the day, and it's: with increasing content creation and citizen journalism, how can we equip citizen journalists with journalistic skills to enable them to tell their stories ethically? So what is if everyone can now do it, but not everyone has gone through the training, what can you recommend to them to be able to do their job effectively and ethically, as the questioner asks? Have about a minute left for each of you if you'd like to respond to this one. I know this is a bit of this one requires a little reflection, and unfortunately the format doesn't require or allow us to reflect. We need to think on our feet.
I think it would be to remind people to be open-minded and really look into both sides of a story, knowing that the truth is typically in the middle, or there's different variations. But again, being open-minded, doing the proper research, and not just spewing out what first comes to mind, or their specific beliefs in some capacity. So it's, again, just being open-minded, taking into consideration two sides of a story so that you can come out with like a very well-rounded story.
Any other thoughts?
Okay.
I'm thinking that. Oh, yes, Elizabeth.
Thank you. I think for me, it all goes back to participatory storytelling. I believe that when we speak with people, it's more powerful than when we speak 2 or 4 people. So for me, it all comes down to grassroots knowledge and engagement. And a perfect example of this is when, through storytelling in the traditional form, where it's a participatory approach in the context that you listen, you engage, you share, you contribute. And it's not just one side of the story, but there are various perspectives to the story, be it in sharing lessons, be it in embracing a particular setting, be it the lesson coming through maybe an animal or a person. So I think it's that sort of context of engaging different voices that we can really equip or embrace citizen journalism.
I think, thank you very much. I like that. I think also we need to tell the little stories. Many times people are looking for the big story. Sometimes there's a little story. There are people who need to be heard. There are experiences that need to be shared. There are events that take place and they're almost like they never happened because the journalists are busy running for the big stories. So it's extremely important then that sometimes we go for the little stories. And if that little story means you have got to take time longer to hear more about what that story is, and you can flesh it out. And finally, when you tell it, when you've never heard a story, it's always new. When you've never heard the news, even if it's 3-4 weeks later, it's still news because you never heard it before. So please, I think it's important for us to go sometimes for those little stories. Give them a voice.
When I was a young journalist, a wise old owl told me to, in the question of objectivity as it relates to ethics, that objectivity is almost this unattainable goal. You can try to do it, but you have a point of view. What he said is to practice fairness, that's something all of us can practice. And that includes including all of the relevant voices, all the things. Check yourself, right? It's to paraphrase Michael Jackson, I'm looking at the man in the mirror. Start with yourself, check yourself. What is your intention? If your intention is to be fair and tell the story in a way that doesn't manipulate, then you probably can do it. You can hold yourself accountable. Well, shockingly, we are out of time. And I say that sincerely because I could listen to the three of you for hours. And I'm sure that I speak for the participants when I say that. Let me close with a couple things. I want to thank the State Department, USAID, my colleagues at the Wilson Center, but most of all, the three brilliant panelists we had today and all of the participants, some of whom had a chance to ask their questions via the chat function. And as Africa's young leaders, we're counting on you to lead us to a better future. I was going to end by saying that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. But instead, I'm going to quote the famous sage Kwame Darko and say, "Times change, stay inspired." Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.